My name is Carol Hendricks. I was 29 years old the night I sat at Beverly Hartman's dining room table and placed a 2-inch folder on her white linen tablecloth. The room smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken. Beverly had put on Frank Sinatra low in the background, the way she always did at Thanksgiving, because Beverly Hartman believed that presentation was everything and that a well-set table could paper over almost anything. There were 14 people at that table, candles lit. Wine poured, the good crystal out of the cabinet that only came down 4 times a year. Beverly had spent 2 days cooking. She had arranged the centerpiece herself, dried oranges and pine branches in a ceramic bowl, the kind of detail that said, "This is a home where things are done properly." And then I pressed play. I already told Derek it's basically a done deal, honey. You and Nathan just need to work out the details. Beverly's voice filled the room. Her own voice. From a phone call she thought was private 3 months earlier, when she had no idea I was recording every word. The fork Derek Calloway had been lifting to his mouth stopped mid-air. He looked at Beverly. Beverly's smile, that permanent, practiced smile, the one I had been watching for 3 years across dinner tables and holidays and Sunday afternoons, went completely still for the first time in 71 years. Nathan, my husband, sitting to my left, stared at the center of the table like he was studying the grain of the wood. His glass of wine sat untouched in front of him. Across from me, Nathan's aunt set down her fork very carefully, without making a sound. $500,000. That was the number Beverly had promised on my behalf, without asking me, without telling me, without a single conversation that ever took place anywhere except inside Beverly Hartman's imagination. What none of them knew was that for the past 4 months, I had been building something Beverly had never encountered in her entire life. A paper trail. Welcome to Betrayal House. If you're new here, this channel is about one thing. Real people, real betrayals, and the quiet, careful, completely legal ways they fought back. I'm so glad you're here today, because this story is one of my favorites. Not because it was easy, not because it was clean, but because of the specific, methodical way it ended, and what it took to get there. Before we go any further, if you enjoy these stories, please take 2 seconds to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know where you're watching from. Because I have a very strong feeling that Beverly Hartman is not unique to Denver, Colorado. I have a feeling she shows up at holiday dinners all over this country, in a cream pantsuit, with a warm smile, and someone else's resources already distributed. Now let me take you back. Because Beverly Hartman did not become Beverly Hartman overnight. And I did not understand what I was dealing with until the damage was already well underway. 3 years before that Thanksgiving dinner, I was 26 years old and newly married. And I thought the biggest challenge of my new life was going to be parallel parking in our apartment's underground garage, which had one of those hairpin entry ramps that required a 3-point turn every single time. I had no idea the real challenge was going to be my mother-in-law. Nathan and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party in the summer, dated for 2 years, and got married on a warm Saturday in October, in a rented barn 30 minutes outside Denver. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings and carried a small bouquet of white ranunculus. Nathan cried at the altar, which I had not expected, and which made me love him approximately 300% more than I already did. The photographer caught the exact moment, his face open and undefended in a way that men's faces usually aren't when people are watching, and I have the print on our mantle to this day. His mother, Beverly Hartman, sat in the front row in a cream pantsuit and looked like she was presiding over the ceremony rather than attending it. I told myself, she's just confident. Some people carry that much certainty in a room. I would learn, much too late, that there is a very specific difference between confidence and control. Confidence belongs to the person who has it. Control is borrowed from everyone nearby. And Beverly Hartman had never, not once in her 71 years on this earth, been told that the resources she was promising away did not belong to her. I want to tell you about 4 incidents, 4 moments that happened across the first 2 years of my marriage, that I filed away one by one under the mental category of, "That's just Beverly." without understanding that what I was actually watching was a system, a pattern she had built over decades, refined through repetition, and sustained through the simple fact that no one in that family had ever pushed back. The first was the cousin. 2 months after Nathan and I moved into our apartment, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor, Denver, clean white walls, the kind of place that smelled like fresh paint and felt like possibility, like a beginning. Beverly called Nathan on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen making pasta, the kind that comes together in 20 minutes when you're tired after work, and I could hear Nathan's side of the conversation in the living room. Yeah, of course. I mean, the 2nd bedroom is just an office right now. Sure, I'll ask Carol. He came into the kitchen with a look on his face I would come to recognize very well over the following 3 years. The look that meant Beverly had already said yes to something, and he needed me to ratify it. My cousin Philip is coming to Denver, he said, for a job interview. He needs somewhere to stay. Okay, I said. For how long? Nathan paused just slightly too long. 3 months? Beverly had already told Philip he could stay. She had told him the room was available, that it was no trouble at all, that Nathan and Carol would love to have the company. She had said all of this before speaking to either of us. Philip had already bought a bus ticket. He was arriving in 11 days. I let him stay. Because I was 26 and new to this family, and because I did not yet understand what that moment of absorption was teaching Beverly. Every time you absorb one of her promises without pushing back, you teach her that the next one will be absorbed too. That was the lesson Beverly had been learning from this family for 50 years, that there was no cost, that the people around her would simply make her commitments true and call it love. Philip stayed for 14 weeks. He left dirty dishes in the sink every morning and kept the television on until 2 a.m, the laugh track of whatever he was watching seeping under our bedroom door. He borrowed $20 from me twice and never mentioned it again. He used the last of the coffee 4 days in a row without replacing it. Beverly, when I mentioned to Nathan that it was getting difficult, said the thing she would say in many different forms over the following years. He's family. You figure it out. The second incident was the kitchen renovation. 8 months into our marriage. A local nonprofit, a community center about 2 miles from Beverly's house, the kind of place that ran after-school programs and hosted recovery meetings on Tuesday nights, was fundraising for a building renovation. Beverly sat on their board. She had, at a board meeting I knew nothing about, offered Nathan's renovation skills as a donation. A full kitchen remodel. Labor and materials. For free. She had announced this to the board, who had thanked her, and put it in the meeting minutes and scheduled a planning call, and then she had simply waited for Nathan to find out and make it real. Nathan found out when the nonprofit's director called him directly to schedule a site visit. He did the renovation. It took 6 weekends, 2 of which fell during a stretch where he was already working 6 days a week on a commercial job. He never billed them a cent, because Beverly had already committed his time and his Saturdays, and Nathan Hartman had been raised inside Beverly Hartman's orbit long enough that refusing felt less like a decision and more like a structural impossibility, like trying to leave through a wall. The third incident was the auction. 14 months into our marriage. Beverly's church held an annual charity auction, a 3-day weekend event, silent bidding on donated items Friday and Saturday, a live auction Saturday evening, cleanup and reconciliation on Sunday. Someone had to coordinate the donated items, manage the check-in tables, catalog the inventory, design the event program, run the volunteer schedule. Beverly served on the planning committee. In February of that year, she sent me a calendar invitation. The subject line read, "Charity Auction, Carol's Weekend." Attached was a full schedule with my name printed at the top of every volunteer shift. The note in the body of the email read, "So excited to have you involved this year. I told the committee you'd coordinate the whole thing. You are so organized, and they really need someone reliable. It's going to be wonderful." She had told the committee. She had already told them. I discovered I was coordinating a 3-day charity event by receiving a pre-formatted schedule. I gave up 3 vacation days and 1 sick day that year to staff an event I had never agreed to organize. The fourth incident, and this is the one I should have understood differently, happened 20 months into my marriage, and it involved money for the first time. Beverly's sister, a woman named Patricia who lived in Albuquerque and whom I had met twice, was dealing with a legal matter. A property dispute of some kind. I was never given the full details, which should have been its own signal. Beverly called Nathan. Later that evening, Nathan told me carefully that he'd agreed to contribute toward Patricia's legal fees. "How much?" I asked. $3,000, he said. We had not been consulted together. Beverly had called Nathan directly, explained the situation, and Nathan had said yes before he spoke to me. The money came from our joint account. Beverly thanked us at the next family dinner in a way that made it sound like we had done it freely, enthusiastically, out of pure love for a family member we barely knew. "Carol and Nathan are so good," she said, touching Nathan's arm. "Family first, always." I looked at Nathan across the table. He looked at his plate. That was when I began to understand. In the slow way that you understand things you didn't want to know. Beverly did not see a line between her resources and other people's. Not because she was confused, because she had never been made to see one. At family dinners, she was the warmth in the room. And at family dinners, she said things like, "I told the Hendersons that Nathan would take a look at their deck next weekend," and "I let the church know we'd host the holiday bake sale here this year." And everyone would nod and pass the potatoes, because disagreeing with Beverly at the dinner table was the kind of thing that technically happened but never fully landed. It was like pushing against weather. Beverly would tilt her head, let the smallest smile soften her face, and say, "Oh, sweetheart," in a tone that made the person disagreeing feel like they had said something embarrassing rather than something reasonable. The conflict would dissolve. The promise would be honored. Beverly would move on. I watched it happen. Dinner after dinner. Year after year. I watched Nathan agree to things he hadn't planned. I watched Beverly's sister accept money Beverly had described as a gift from Nathan, without Nathan having characterized it that way. I watched Amber, Nathan's older sister, quietly rearrange her schedule around commitments Beverly had made for her. A weekend here, a favor there, and say nothing, because saying something had never gotten anyone anywhere. And I watched everyone absorb it. Every time. Because Beverly was Beverly. And this was simply the tax of being in this family. And the tax was always paid by someone other than Beverly. Derek Calloway first appeared in my life at one of those dinners, about 8 months after Nathan and I got married. He was married to Amber, and he had the easy, broad confidence of a man who had never truly been held responsible for the gap between what he promised and what he delivered. He was 34 when I first met him, handsome in a way that was starting to blur slightly at the edges. A salesman's warmth in his handshake, the kind of laugh that made people feel included even when nothing funny had been said. Beverly adored him. She touched his shoulder when she passed behind his chair. She saved him the good seat closest to the kitchen so she could fill his glass first. I had been around enough offices and courtrooms and small professional worlds by that point to know what it meant when someone performed warmth and charm at that level. It meant they were managing something. It meant there was something they were managing around. Later I would find out what. Derek had been in various stages of financial trouble for most of his adult life. 2 failed businesses in his 20s. A bankruptcy in his early 30s that he had somehow absorbed into his self-presentation so completely that you almost couldn't find the seams. A current situation involving $500,000 in outstanding business debt, equipment loans, investor payback, vendor arrears, that had been accruing while Derek maintained his smile and his seat at Beverly's dinner table. At the first dinner where I met him, Beverly squeezed his shoulder and said, "Derek's going through a rough patch. But family always figures it out." Nathan nodded. I smiled and passed the salad. I didn't understand yet what that sentence was. It was a forecast. I started working at the law firm when I was 24 years old, the summer after I finished my associate's degree in legal administration. Entry-level records coordination, which meant I spent my days organizing and processing legal filings, tracking document chains, matching certified copies against originals, flagging missing signatures, maintaining the intake log. It was not glamorous. It was, in fact, the kind of work that most people at law firms treat the way they treat the furniture. Present, necessary, occasionally noticed when it breaks. partners walked past the records room without looking up. When I sat in the back corner of a conference room cross-referencing exhibits against a filing index while a meeting proceeded around me, people talked freely as if I weren't there. But I was there, and I was listening to everything. My supervisor in the first year was a senior attorney named Eleanor Voss. Eleanor was 53, wore her gray hair in a short, deliberate cut that required no styling, and had the habit of thinking out loud. Not for anyone's benefit, not because she wanted feedback, but because working through a problem verbally was how her mind operated, and she had long since stopped caring whether anyone else was in the room when she did it. If you were nearby while Eleanor was working through a legal question, you received a free education whether you wanted one or not. I wanted one. I started staying late. I found reasons to reorganize shelves near Eleanor's office. I developed what might have looked from the outside like a very thorough filing practice that happened to keep me proximate to the room where Eleanor dictated her thinking into the air 3 evenings a week. What I learned in that first year: the law, at its most practical level, is not about justice or fairness. It is about what you can demonstrate. It is about what exists on paper versus what exists only in someone's account of events. Memory is what you believe happened. Evidence is what you can show happened. Those two things overlap sometimes, and sometimes they are completely different. And the difference is where cases are won and lost. Eleanor started explaining things to me directly. There was a period, in my second year at the firm, when we were deep into a stack of debt collection cases, creditors pursuing individuals who claimed they had never agreed to certain financial obligations. I processed the filings. I organized the evidence packets. I read, in the course of my job, dozens of statements from people trying to prove what they had or hadn't consented to, and what documentation they could produce versus what they were simply asserting from memory. The work was dense and repetitive, and I read every page. What I learned in those months: a single dated text message can decide a case. A voicemail someone kept for 2 years because something told them to keep it can become the turning point in an entire dispute. A gap in someone's records, no emails, no bank statements, no documentation of any kind, can destroy an otherwise reasonable position. I filed all of this the way I filed everything at work. Neatly, labeled, in order. It was one of those late evenings, maybe 8 months into my marriage, when Eleanor and I were both still at the office past 6 o'clock, working through a batch of debt collection filings, and I mentioned something offhand, not with any purpose behind it, just filling the quiet the way you do when you've been working alongside someone for a while. My mother-in-law made a promise on my husband's behalf without asking him, I said, matching a certified copy against an original. He had to honor it because she'd already told the other person he would. Is there a legal concept that covers that? Like, can someone actually bind you to a commitment they made for you? Eleanor looked up from her desk. She set down her pen. She did not do this often. That's called third-party misrepresentation, she said. Or, depending on how the receiving party acted on it, promissory estoppel. What's promissory estoppel? It means, Eleanor said, leaning back slightly in the way she did when she was about to teach something rather than just say something, that if someone made you a promise, even a verbal one, even one made without any legal authority, and you materially changed your behavior because of it, you may have a legal claim. The key word is reliance. Did you make decisions based on that promise? Did you turn down other options? Did you tell creditors or other parties that you had a solution coming? If yes, you may have a claim against the person who failed to honor it. Not necessarily a winning claim in every circumstance, but enough of a claim to cause significant problems. She paused. You'd be amazed how often this tears families apart. Someone says yes on someone else's behalf. The third party relies on it. Then the person whose name was used refuses to pay up, or can't. It becomes a legal disaster, and an emotional one at the same time. And the longer it runs without documentation, the messier it gets for everyone. She picked up her pen. The protection against it, she added, already looking back at her document, is documentation. Time-stamped proof that you never agreed. The other party's own words demonstrating they acted without your authority. Bank records showing no movement. The paper trail has to exist before the claim is formalized, not after. After is almost always too late. I nodded. I filed the information the way I filed everything. Neatly, labeled, in order. I went home that night and found a sticky note on the kitchen counter in Nathan's handwriting. Mom called. Said Derek's situation might need a family conversation soon. I read it twice. I put it in the junk drawer. I told myself it would probably be fine. I would later wish I had dated that note and kept it. I want to tell you about the $47,000, because the money is the point. Not in an abstract way. In a specific, concrete, this is what it cost us way that I need you to understand before I tell you what Beverly tried to do with it. Nathan and I had been saving for a house deposit for 2 years. We had a spreadsheet. Yes, a spreadsheet, because I work at a law firm, and I process documents for a living, and leaving something this important to memory or good intentions seemed reckless. Every first of the month, a fixed transfer went from our checking into a joint savings account. We tracked it. We watched it grow. We had conversations about neighborhoods, whether we wanted walkability or square footage, whether a third bedroom was realistic or just hopeful, whether the school district mattered yet, even though we didn't have children, because it would matter eventually, and the time to buy is before it matters, not after. $47,000. I want you to understand what that number represented in terms of actual days. It represented Nathan taking weekend renovation jobs when he was already tired from Monday through Friday, coming home Saturday evenings with sawdust caught in his hair, and the particular kind of fatigue that settles in the joints, not just the muscles. It represented me working overtime during filing season, staying late to process deadlines, driving home in the dark with the particular hollow feeling of having spent your evening at work, but satisfied in a specific way that comes only when you're giving something up for something that matters. It represented the cheap pasta I made on Tuesdays, the vacations we did not take, the times I looked at a restaurant menu and ordered the second cheapest thing without thinking about it, the time Nathan's work boot wore through the sole and he repaired it with shoe glue for 3 months before buying a new pair. It represented a Saturday morning in March when I opened the banking app at the kitchen table and watched the balance cross $45,000 for the first time, and felt tears come up so suddenly that I was embarrassed by them. This involuntary, physical response to a number on a screen. And Nathan came in and saw my face and sat down next to me and looked at the balance and put his arm around me without saying anything. And we sat like that for a few minutes in the morning light. That money was not abstract. It was specific. It was all those small, specific things. And when Derek Calloway called me on a Tuesday evening in November, I was in the kitchen making dinner, garlic and olive oil warming in the pan, the smell of it filling the apartment, Sinatra low on the Bluetooth speaker because Nathan had gotten me into Sinatra, and I had surrendered to it. And I was completely unprepared for what was about to come out of Derek's mouth. His name came up on my phone. I almost let it go to voicemail. We were cordial, Derek and I. The careful, particular cordiality of people who are connected by marriage rather than by choice. People who are genuinely kind to each other across holiday tables but don't have the kind of relationship that includes phone calls. I answered anyway. Carol. His voice was warm. Warmer than usual, actually. Almost relieved. Hey, I just wanted to reach out because I didn't want things to be weird at Christmas. I know this is a significant ask. I really do. But I want you to know how much it means to me and Amber both. I turned the heat down on the stove. Derek, I said carefully, I'm sorry. What exactly are you referring to? A pause. What Beverly told me. At the family lunch a couple of weeks ago. She said you and Nathan had already talked it through and that you were going to step in and help with the debt situation. The garlic was starting to catch. I turned the burner off entirely. How much? I said, keeping my voice level. Did Beverly tell you we were going to help with? The full amount, Derek said. The $500,000. I don't remember the exact words I used to end that call. I remember being very calm, the way I get when something serious happens, and my body understands before my mind catches up that this requires precision rather than emotion. I told Derek I needed to speak with Beverly and that I would be in touch. I set the phone down on the counter next to the cold pan. I stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then I picked the phone back up and called Beverly. She answered on the second ring, cheerful, in the voice she used when she was expecting a pleasant update. "Sweetheart," she said, before I had finished my first sentence. "Before you say anything, I know what you're going to say, and I want you to really hear me. Derek has been drowning for 2 years. I mean, actually drowning. I couldn't watch it anymore. I told him you and Nathan would figure something out, because that is what this family does. It's not a legal document. It's love. It's what we do for each other. Beverly," I kept my voice even, deliberate. "You told him we would pay $500,000. I told him you would help." The correction came smoothly, the tiniest verbal reframe. Not a lie, exactly, just a gentle reshape of the truth, the way water finds a new path around an obstacle. There's a difference. Family helps. Beverly, we have $47,000 in savings. We are saving for a house deposit. That is the entirety of what we have saved. Oh, Carol. A small, soft exhale through the phone, as if I had said something sweet, but slightly naive. Something that showed I didn't quite understand how the world worked. Houses can wait. I hung up. I called Nathan. I gave him everything. Derek's words, Beverly's words, the number, all of it in order. Nathan was quiet for a long time. "She gets carried away," he said finally. "She does this. It'll blow over." "Nathan, he called me to thank me. He mentioned his creditors have already been updated. We don't know that for certain. She told him it was basically done." Those were the words she used. Basically done. "Carol." A pause. I could hear the road noise from his truck. He was driving home. "Don't make this into a war." I sat with that sentence. Don't make this into a war. As though I had walked into a family lunch Beverly hadn't invited me to, and committed someone else's savings to a debt I had never heard of, never discussed, never agreed to pay. I went to the bedroom. I opened my laptop. I created a new folder on the desktop. I named it Hartman. The next morning, I walked into Eleanor's office and closed the door behind me. She looked up. She read my face, the way she had learned to read faces over 30 years of working with people in crisis. "Personal situation," I said. "I need about 15 minutes." Eleanor folded her hands on her desk and listened without interrupting. Beverly's promise, Derek's call, the $500,000, the $47,000, Nathan's dismissal on the phone, all of it, start to finish. When I finished, she was quiet. "You remember what I told you about promissory estoppel?" "Yes." "Here's what you're actually facing," she said. "Beverly's promise is not legally binding on you. She had no authority, legal, contractual, or otherwise, to commit your finances. That part is clear and clean. But if Derek can demonstrate that he relied on that promise in a material way, if he declined other options, paused negotiations with his creditors, made financial decisions specifically because Beverly told him a resolution was coming, he has a potential claim. Probably not a strong one, but enough of a claim to cost you real money in legal fees, real time, and real stress, even if you ultimately prevail. What do I do?" "You document everything," Eleanor said. "Not selectively. Everything. Bank statements showing zero movement toward Derek. Every communication from Beverly, in which she speaks as though this arrangement is already settled. Every communication from Derek that references the promise. Your own statements, texts, emails, anything, in which you clearly state that you did not agree." She paused. "And Carol, you know Colorado is a one-party consent state." I knew. One-party consent. In Colorado, only one person in a conversation needs to know it's being recorded. That person can be the one holding the phone. "Get the paper trail established now," Eleanor said, already turning back to her screen, "before he formalizes anything. Before this goes from a family misunderstanding to a legal claim. Documentation before the claim. Always. That's the rule." I walked back to my desk. I pulled out a legal pad, and wrote 4 questions at the top of the page. What did Beverly say? To whom? When? Can I prove it? I spent the next 8 weeks building the file. I want to be honest about what that process actually felt like, because it is easy, from the outside, to imagine something like righteous momentum, the focused protagonist gathering evidence, each discovery confirming the next, clarity arriving like a tide. The reality was slower and colder than that. It felt like sitting in an apartment that had grown drafty, finally admitting that the problem was structural and understanding, with the particular exhaustion of clarity arriving too late, that no amount of extra blankets was going to address it. I started by building a timeline. I went back through every text thread I had with Beverly, all the way back, 14 months, further than I had initially thought was necessary, and I found something that changed the shape of what I was looking at. Beverly had not made an impulsive promise to Derek. She had been laying groundwork for over 2 months before Derek called me. The messages were right there in my phone, and I had read them at the time as ordinary family updates. A message from September. Derek and Amber were so grateful for your warmth at Sunday dinner last week. You really are such a good addition to this family, Carol. I had been warm at Sunday dinner last week. I had passed the salad and asked about Amber's work, and listened politely to Derek's story about a failed business pitch. I had been, in other words, a normal person at a family dinner. Beverly had taken that and turned it into a character she was building. A Carol who was already disposed toward Derek's situation. A Carol who had already, in some formless way, agreed. A message from early October, 3 weeks before Derek called me. I was telling a few people today what a good team you and Nathan make. So generous. So dependable. Derek is fortunate to have family like you in his corner. She had been narrating a version of me. A version who was already generous toward Derek, already in his corner, to the family, to Derek, to whoever would listen. She had been constructing a fiction and attaching my name to it, so that when she made the promise, it would arrive pre-softened, pre-substantiated. A Carol who would obviously say yes, because this Carol had been saying yes in people's minds for weeks. In the 3 weeks since Derek's phone call, Beverly had sent me 4 more messages. None of them said directly that I had promised to pay Derek's debt. But read in sequence, with the October messages as context. The first. Carol, I just wanted to say that what you and Nathan are doing for Derek is such a beautiful thing. He is so relieved. The second. 3 days later. Derek asked me to pass along a question. Is there a rough timeline you're thinking? He wants to update his creditors so they have something concrete to hold on to. The third. I know this is a lot, but you will be so glad you did it. That is what family is. The fourth, the morning after I had confronted Beverly by phone. Let's not let this get bigger than it needs to be, sweetheart. Derek just needs to know there is light at the end. That's all. I screenshot every single one. I printed them and put them in the Hartman folder with the date and time noted in the margin. Then, I called Beverly. I had my phone set to record before I dialed. I kept my voice easy, curious, warm even, and told her I wanted to understand what had been communicated to Derek, so Nathan and I could figure out what came next. Beverly relaxed immediately. She always relaxed in conversations where she believed she was being managed rather than examined. She had no reason to be careful. Carol had always been quiet. Carol had always absorbed. I told him it was basically a done deal, honey. You and Nathan just need to work out the details. He needed to hear something definitive. You know how Derek gets when he's anxious. He just needed to know family had his back. I pressed stop. I sat very still for a moment, looking at the waveform on the screen. Then I saved the file, labeled it with the date, and put it in the folder. The bank statements were next. 2 months of records from our joint account, every outgoing transfer annotated. Nothing to Derek, nothing to any of his creditors. The balance sat at $47,211. Untouched. Then I found the email Beverly had sent to Amber. A week after Derek's call, I had texted Amber directly and told her I was piecing together a timeline of what Beverly had communicated to Derek and when. I asked if Amber knew anything. Amber, to her credit, responded within 20 minutes. She sent me a screenshot of an email Beverly had sent her in October, 3 weeks before Derek called me to say thank you. The email read, "Wonderful news. Nathan and Carol have decided they are going to help Derek with the debt situation. I knew they would come through. That is the kind of people they are. Don't say anything to Carol yet. Let her tell you herself when she is ready. But isn't it wonderful?" Beverly had told Amber. 3 weeks before Derek called me. 3 weeks before anyone said a word to me. She had already announced my decision, described it as freely made, and asked Amber to wait quietly for me to confirm it, as if the only thing remaining was the formality of my agreeing to something I had already apparently decided. I added the screenshot to the file. Then came the detail that changed the scale of everything. In the 3rd week of December, I called Derek's primary creditor, not to negotiate, simply to ask a question. I explained that I was a family member involved in the Callaway situation and asked about the current status of the account. The representative told me the account had been placed in a pending resolution hold 6 weeks prior, at Derek's request, on the basis of a private family commitment expected within 90 days. The hold had suspended collection proceedings entirely. 6 weeks prior. That was 2 weeks before Derek called me to thank me. Which meant Beverly had made the promise, and Derek had already acted on it, had already restructured his entire creditor timeline, had already stopped pursuing other solutions, had already placed his financial recovery on hold, based on a promise Beverly made using my name. Before anyone said a single word to me, I added the call notes to the folder. I held it in both hands at my kitchen table on a Thursday evening, 2 inches thick. The pages smelled like the printer ink from the law firm's machines. Outside the window, Denver was cold and dark, and the neighbors' Christmas lights were blinking in the bare trees across the alley. Beverly had been saying yes with my name for 4 months. She had built a character, performed that character to the family, and then used that character to make a $500,000 promise to a man who was drowning in debt and desperate enough to believe it. Now I was going to say no with her own words. Before I tell you what Derek put in writing, and yes, he did put it in writing, I want to pause for just a second. If you are watching this right now, and you have ever had someone make a promise using your name, your money, your time, your reputation, your resources, I want you to drop a yes or a no in the comments below. I want to see how many of you are in this story right now. And if you are new to this channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is Betrayal House. We don't do silent suffering here. We do paper trails. Now back to Carol. The email arrived on a Thursday morning in January. I was at my desk at the firm, coffee half finished, when my personal phone buzzed. Derek Callaway. Subject line. Payment timeline. Following up. Hi Carol and Nathan. I hope you had a good New Year. I wanted to follow up on the commitment Beverly Hartman confirmed on your behalf back in November. I've been holding off on other options out of respect for what you're doing for our family, but I need to start showing my creditors a concrete timeline. My accountant is recommending a first installment of $80,000 within 90 days, with the remainder structured over 24 months. Please let me know when we can schedule a call. He had CC'd Beverly. 20 minutes later, Beverly forwarded the email to Nathan with the message. Sweetheart, we should all get on a call this week. Derek is under a lot of pressure. Nathan called me from his truck. His voice was careful in the way voices get careful when someone is choosing words. I saw the email. I saw it too. Maybe we help a little, not the full amount, but something. Just to get things moving and get him off our backs. Nathan. I was standing in the hallway outside the records room, keeping my voice low. He used the words "on your behalf" in a formal written communication. He specified an installment amount. He CC'd your mother. He has suspended negotiations with his creditors based on this promise. This is not a family conversation anymore. He is formalizing a legal claim. You're making this into a war. Your mother declared it, I said, the moment she committed our savings to someone else without asking us. I am just the only one who noticed in time to do something about it. Long silence on his end. Road noise. What are you going to do? What I've been doing for 2 months, I said. My job. That night I emailed Eleanor 2 words. Ready? Proceed. Eleanor drafted the cease and desist the following week. 3 pages on law firm letterhead, professional and exact. It stated that Carol Hartman, née Hendricks, had made no financial commitment to Derek Calloway at any point, that no agreement had been reached, that Beverly Hartman had no legal authority to make financial commitments on Carol's behalf, and that any further attempts to enforce this non-existent obligation, in writing, verbally, or through any third party, would be treated as fraudulent misrepresentation and pursued accordingly. Addressed jointly to Derek Calloway and Beverly Hartman. I read it 3 times, then called Eleanor. "This is exactly right," I said. "I know," she said. "I chose Thanksgiving because Beverly loved Thanksgiving above all other occasions. She hosted every year without exception. The dining room table extended to its full length, the china out of the cabinet that only came down for the major holidays, Sinatra on the stereo, a room full of people Beverly had curated the way a director curates a cast. The whole family gathered. Nathan's 2 aunts, Amber and Derek, Beverly's neighbor Margaret, who had been coming for 15 years and occupied her seat as if she had always been there, and enough witnesses to make silence afterward structurally impossible. I printed 2 copies of the cease and desist. I printed the transcript of the recorded call, Beverly's key lines highlighted in yellow. I downloaded the audio file to my phone and positioned it at the top of my recent files so I would not fumble for it. I told Nathan I was going to Thanksgiving dinner. He said, "Of course we're going. It's Thanksgiving." He didn't ask what was in the folder by the front door. I didn't tell him. The drive over was cold and dry. The Denver streets lit orange under the streetlights. Nathan with the radio low. Me watching the houses pass and thinking about Eleanor's voice saying documentation, and Beverly's voice saying basically a done deal. And the $47,000 sitting in our account, untouched, exactly where we had put it. I chose Thanksgiving deliberately. Beverly loved an audience. I was going to give her one. The house smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken. Sinatra, low in the background, the same record Beverly had been playing at these dinners for 20 years. She moved through the living room in her cream pantsuit with the particular ease of someone who has never once been made to feel unwelcome anywhere she has entered. She touched shoulders. She filled glasses. She laughed at someone's story about a delayed flight and looked genuinely delighted to be at the center of all these people who had come to her table. I set my coat on the back of a dining chair. I slid the folder onto the sideboard near the hallway. Under my coat, out of sight. I waited. We had the salad course. We had the butternut squash soup Beverly made from scratch every year using a recipe she claimed was her grandmother's, but which Nathan's aunt had once told me, privately and with great satisfaction, she had found in a 1987 issue of a cooking magazine. We passed the bread. Beverly moved around the table with a wine bottle, and everyone's glass was kept full. Derek was relaxed. More relaxed than I had seen him in months. The easy, broad confidence had come back. He was leaning into his chair, wineglass in hand, smiling and nodding at Nathan's story about a difficult job site, a man whose problem he believed had been solved, and who was simply waiting, at this point, for the paperwork to arrive. The turkey was carved and brought to the table. Plates were passed. Beverly raised her glass. Before we do that, I said. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the temperature changes before anyone can say why. 14 faces turned toward me. Beverly's smile stayed exactly in place. "Carol, sweetheart, we are about to..." "Beverly." I said her name the way you set something heavy down on a hard surface. Deliberately, squarely, without rushing it. "In November of this year, you told Derek Calloway that I would pay his $500,000 debt. You did this without speaking to me, without my knowledge or my consent, and without any legal authority to make a financial commitment on my behalf." The room held its breath. Derek looked at me, then at Beverly. His wineglass was still in his hand. I reached behind me to the sideboard and picked up the folder. I placed the cease and desist in front of Derek. "This is a formal legal notice, drafted by a licensed attorney on firm letterhead. It states that no financial obligation exists, that no agreement was ever made, and that any further attempt to enforce this non-existent commitment will be treated as fraudulent misrepresentation. I placed the printed transcript in front of Beverly. Her name appeared 6 times in yellow highlighter. This is a transcript of a phone call you and I had on October 14th. I've highlighted the parts you'll want to read. Beverly's eyes went to the paper. I watched her read the highlighted lines. I watched her face do something I had never seen it do in 3 years. Not anger, not tears, not even the familiar gentle reframe. Something closer to the expression of a person who realizes, for the very first time, that a game they believed they were playing alone has had 2 players the whole time. The smile went still. Not collapsed. Still. Frozen exactly where it had been. I picked up my phone. I opened the audio file. I pressed play. Beverly's own voice filled the dining room over the soft sound of Sinatra in the background. I already told Derek it's basically a done deal, honey. You and Nathan just need to work out the details. He needed to hear something definitive. You know how Derek gets when he's anxious. He needed to know family had his back. The recording ended. No one spoke. The candles burned down another fraction of an inch. The good crystal caught the light. 14 people at a table with their plates in front of them, all of them looking at Beverly Hartman, who for the first time in the 3 years I had known her, for possibly the first time in decades, had absolutely nothing to say. Nathan's aunt slowly set her fork down on the edge of her plate, as if setting it down carefully might help. Derek's voice, when it came, was stripped of everything that usually lived in it. No performance, no confidence, no warmth. She told me you agreed. I know what she told you, I said. And I am genuinely sorry that you restructured your creditor timeline based on a promise that was never mine to make. That is a real consequence, and I don't dismiss it. But here, in Beverly's own voice, recorded in October, is the actual conversation. And here, I held up the bank statements, is 2 months of records from our account. Not $1 has moved toward yours. Because there was no agreement. Because I was never asked. Nathan was staring at the centerpiece, the dried oranges, the pine branches. His jaw was tight. Amber was looking at her mother, then at Derek, then at her plate, something moving through her face that I couldn't fully read. Beverly sat completely still. Not a reframe. Not a head tilt. Not a sweetheart. Don't be dramatic. Not the warm exhale. Not the, oh, let's not make this bigger than it is. Not one single tool from the kit she had been using at family dinners for 50 years. For the first time in 71 years, Beverly Hartman said nothing at all. The silence lasted long enough that Beverly's neighbor Margaret reached quietly across the table and refilled her own wine glass with a steadiness that I found, in the moment, genuinely admirable. I closed the folder. I stood up. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. "Enjoy dinner," I said. "The chicken smells wonderful." Nathan followed me out to the car without a word. The door closed behind us. And what none of them had known for the past 4 months, was that I had been building something Beverly Hartman had never encountered in her entire life. A paper trail. And it held. Here is what happened after. Derek Calloway reopened negotiations with his actual creditors. Real negotiations, at a real table, with real numbers that reflected his actual situation, rather than a promise made from someone else's account. The pending resolution hold was lifted. His accountant structured a payment plan that was painful and real, and his, which it always should have been. His credit took genuine damage from the months he had spent waiting on Beverly's fiction, instead of addressing the problem himself. But it was honest damage, and it was his to repair, which is the only kind of damage you can actually do anything about. Amber called me 3 days after Thanksgiving. She didn't apologize exactly. She said she hadn't known the full picture, which was true and which I believed, and that she was sorry I had been put in that position. We sat at a coffee shop 2 weeks later, and she told me something I hadn't known. Beverly had done a version of this to her too, several years before. Different number, different person. Amber had paid it, rather than fight it. She had never told anyone. "I thought," Amber said, holding her mug with both hands, "that this was just how family worked. I didn't know there was another option." Beverly lost something in the weeks after Thanksgiving that she had not known she possessed until the moment she lost it. The family's collective assumption that she was harmless. Nathan's aunt called Nathan in December and told him, carefully and quietly, that Beverly had once committed her garage space for an entire summer to a family acquaintance without asking. Another cousin came forward with a story about Beverly promising their time to a neighborhood committee. The stories had always been there. They had simply never been spoken out loud in the same room as other stories. Once the pattern was visible, everyone could see it. At Christmas, 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, something had shifted in the room. Beverly still hosted. She still put out the good china. She still played Sinatra. But when she said, "I told the Millers that Nathan would give them an estimate on their garage," Nathan said, mildly and without making a production of it, "I'll give them a call next week and see if it makes sense." Not a commitment. A consideration. A simple, quiet redirection that would have been unthinkable a year before. Beverly looked at him, then at me. Then she said, "Of course, sweetheart," and moved on. She stopped making promises for other people. She stopped saying we when she meant you. She stopped distributing commitments that belonged to others as if they were hers to give. Whether that was conscience or calculation, or simply the first real consequence she had ever faced in 71 years, I don't know. I'm not sure it matters. Nathan apologized. Not the night of Thanksgiving. That night he sat in the passenger seat on the drive home without speaking, staring at the road, working through something I gave him the space to work through. But 6 weeks later, a Saturday morning in January, sitting at our kitchen table with his second cup of coffee, winter light coming sideways through the window, he said, "I should have listened to you when you first told me." I kept saying it would blow over because I did not want to have a hard conversation with my mother. I have been doing that my entire life, finding ways to absorb her choices so I didn't have to confront her about them. And this time, I made you absorb them instead. That was wrong. It was not a perfect apology. It was a real one. I'll take real over perfect every time. 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, Nathan and I closed on a house. 3 bedrooms. A yard with a maple tree on one side and 2 apple trees on the other, planted by the previous owners and never named, which means I get to name them. The closing table was in a small office downtown. A notary who had clearly done this 10,000 times. A stack of papers we had reviewed the night before, so nothing was a surprise. And we signed our names next to all the right lines and walked out into the spring parking lot. And Nathan said, "We did it." And I said, "Yes, we did." And we stood there for a moment in the cold, bright air, not quite ready to get back in the car, just standing with it. The $47,000 deposit, intact. Untouched. Every penny of it. Exactly where we had put it. I kept the Hartman folder. It lives in the filing cabinet in the home office now, in a drawer labeled closed, between the mortgage documents and the car insurance policy. I don't open it often, but I know it's there, and knowing it's there feels different from what I expected. Not triumphant, not angry, something quieter, solid. The particular feeling of a thing that is settled and will stay settled. Sometimes I think about Beverly's voice on that recording, the lightness of it, the complete casual certainty of someone who has never had any reason to be careful about the difference between her resources and other people's. Basically, a done deal, honey. That tone is what I come back to when people ask me what I actually took away from all of this. The tone tells you more than the words. Beverly was not lying in the way that requires effort or premeditation or guilt. She was doing what she had always done. Moving through the world as though everyone around her had already agreed, as though her generosity and her authority were the same thing, as though the resources she distributed so freely became hers, simply by virtue of her willingness to deploy them. The people who are most generous with other people's things are the ones who have never been held to account for it. They operate on the assumption that someone else will absorb the mess, that the family will figure it out, that the daughter-in-law will stay quiet, the way she always has, because that is what the daughter-in-law does. Until one evening, she opens a laptop and creates a folder on her desktop. Until she writes 4 questions at the top of a legal pad. Until she presses record. I never needed Beverly Hartman to say she was sorry. I needed her to stop. And she did. And the house has 2 apple trees, and I am going to name them. And that, for me, is enough. If you watched this story all the way to the end, thank you. That genuinely means something to me. You gave me your time, and I don't take that lightly. If this story brought someone to mind, if you have a Beverly in your life, if you have ever had a promise made in your name without your permission, if someone has ever told you to just absorb it and figure it out, drop their first name in the comments below. Just their first name. I want to see how many Beverlys are out there. I suspect it is a very long list. If you are new to this channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Every story on Betrayal House is real. Every person in it chose documentation over drama and patience over panic, and I think you are going to love it here. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, and I will see you in the next one.